Hello everyone, I'm Ash, VP of Marketing at LeanData. Thank you for attending today's webinar on marketing attribution. LeanData is known for its lead-to-account matching and routing solutions. What's not as well known is that we have a robust marketing attribution solution too. In today's webinar, David Walker of Revenue Pulse will present a case study on how a leading flash storage company understood the true influence of their past marketing campaigns to help them make the best data-driven decisions on allocating their marketing budget. Now, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please enter any questions into the chat window and we will address as many as possible. Also, we'll send everyone a recording of the webinar in a day or two. A note about today's presenter, David Walker. David is a Marketo certified consultant at Revenue Pulse, where he's focused on helping clients understand marketing attribution and the actions that drive pipeline and revenue. Prior to that, he was at Alcatel-Lucent and Halogen Software, where he was the lead for marketing analytics, lead management, email marketing, and CRM administration. Without further ado, over to you, David.
Thanks, Ash, for that introduction. Before we get into the real meat of the webinar today, I think it's important to provide some background to everyone that's with us, so that way you really understand why we're talking with you today and kind of the importance, I think, of this webinar and what we're talking about in terms of attribution. So in terms of who we are, I am a Marketo consultant with Revenue Pulse. And the reason that we're even talking today is because actually one of our clients hired us to perform an independent third-party analysis of all of their attribution sources and to provide a recommendation at the end of the day for which platform they should use and ultimately what reports they should be using to measure their marketing's performance. So prior to us even doing this bake-off, which we'll go through in detail, we actually had not any type of partnership with LeanData. We came in with an unbiased approach, and we are really looking to get under the covers in terms of seeing what the differences were, both for our clients and just in general, and to really provide that third-party recommendation. And the reason why we came at this from an unbiased approach is pretty evident, because ultimately we're serving our clients' needs, and we want to make sure that they actually are able to show and prove their true impact within the organization. And so that they can make accurate data-driven decisions on where to allocate their time and their money, because ultimately they're always trying to drive more pipeline and more revenue for their business. So again, coming into this, we're really coming with an unbiased approach. The fact that we are doing this webinar with LeanData may tease some of the results, but I think it's really important to understand that before we even get into the webinar. And I think as you see how we did our bake-off and our comparison, you'll understand some of the conclusions that we came to. So we're going to start things off, and I'm actually going to give you just a brief overview of the Attribution Bakeoff that we did for one of our clients and that we've done a few times now as well. And so the methodology that we took is that we really try to understand where should we get our attribution data from. And so to perform an Attribution Bakeoff, we always start with defining the analysis constraint. And this is just to say that we want to make sure that it's a level playing field for all attribution platforms. And it is important to point out that here we are specifically talking about Salesforce, Marketo, and LeanData. So here we're making sure that we're looking at the same time period, so an entire fiscal year's worth of data, and that we have no constraints beyond that. We're not looking at a specific geography. We're not looking at only new business versus existing business. We want to make sure that we keep the biases to a minimum, and so we really look at a complete data set. Then we actually do the initial LeanData model setup, and we do a preliminary analysis. So this is where we actually look at some of the high-level data that we're seeing from Salesforce reporting, from Marketo reporting, and from our initial LeanData model. By looking at certain things like what our top campaigns are, what the differences are, we can actually start to see some of the both user and configuration problems within each of the systems. Unfortunately, Salesforce and Marketo are very limited in terms of what you can actually influence, but because LeanData, we have full control over that model, we can actually use that preliminary analysis to actually iterate through many different models. So we'll typically go through at least 2 to 3 different models before we land on the best LeanData model for a given business. And then once we have that best version of that model, we can then do the comparison between Salesforce, Marketo, and LeanData, compare the results, and at the end of the day, we actually get to say and share that with the business, and we let them really crown the winner. So we certainly have recommendations that we provide, but we always open that up to the interpretation of the business as well to give that type of feedback. So now we're going to actually look at some of the differences that come up during this comparison. So here's just a quick overview of our 3 different reporting sources. So we have Salesforce, Marketo, and LeanData. So Salesforce, our attribution credit is given typically exclusively to the last campaign touch. This is what most organizations do, regardless of whether it's Salesforce, but in all CRMs, they look to give all last touch credit and 100% of that credit to the last campaign touch. Campaign influence is something that we can do, so it's important to point out that there is the ability to do some type of campaign influence in Salesforce. So we have both multi-touch and last touch. But one of the big things is that we actually require an opportunity rule to actually get any type of attribution credit in Salesforce. And later on, we'll get to see how that can really impact your numbers. In Marketo, they really try to provide the other side of the coin of Salesforce. And so here we get both multi-touch, but we also get first touch attribution, which Salesforce doesn't provide. And here for the multi-touch in Marketo, what we always have is equal split of the credit for any time where there's multiple touches. But one of the big things, one of the big value props for Marketo was, of course, that you didn't actually have to have those opportunity roles defined, that you could look at all the contacts on an account. But that being said, is that we start to not look at a lot of the leads in our marketing and sales database that aren't tied to the account and that we don't have visibility into. We also have no expiry on campaign touches, which means that a lot of times we'll have very old campaigns that we're still giving attribution credit for years later. With LeanData, we actually get the full circle in terms of first touch, multi-touch, and last touch reporting. With the reporting, we actually can give weighted attribution credit to eligible campaigns. So that's to say that you could define the fact that a trade show campaign touch is worth more than an email campaign touch, for example. And here we're taking into account both leads and contacts, and we can actually define the number of days prior to an opportunity being created for attribution credit. So that's where you may have an opportunity generated in 2017, and you're not giving credit to a campaign touch that happened in 2011. And it's important to point out that we take into account both contacts and matched leads. So here are roughly the pros and cons for each approach. With Salesforce, the pros are really that it's got minimal configuration required. It's also the closest to the opportunity data. We do have last touch and multi-touch attribution. And to be honest, it's that it's a trusted source. Our sales team and our marketing team are both in Salesforce, and even finance usually is in Salesforce. And so typically, if it exists in Salesforce, we have confidence in it. But if it doesn't exist in Salesforce, does it exist? So our cons is really that it requires manual input, so we have to define those opportunity roles. It's also prone to human error and manual intervention. Having worked with many, many clients, it's not uncommon to see marketers or salespeople influencing what campaigns get attribution. We also have no control over the time frame of influence relative to the opportunity creation. And what's really important is we don't give credit to leads within the marketing database and within the account. It's really those opportunity roles. So for Marketo, the pros are that, again, minimal configuration required. It runs as you have the system configured. A great benefit that Salesforce doesn't have is that you don't actually have to have those opportunity roles defined, and that we do have multi-touch and first touch attribution. Now, some of the cons is that, again, we don't have any control over the time frame of influence relative to the opportunity creation. So that's where we end up with really old campaigns that constantly are giving and getting attribution credit, much past when they were actually run. We also don't have any supported weighting for multi-touch. So an email touch is always going to be exactly equal to a trade show touch, which is exactly equal to a webinar touch. And sometimes that may not be necessarily true for all businesses. Unfortunately, a big knock against Marketo, in our experience, is simply that it is an external system out of Salesforce, and that because the reporting is done out of Marketo, there's less confidence in the actual underlying data. And again, we actually don't have any insight into the matched leads. With LeanData, we have a number of pros. So we're able to take some of the good parts of Marketo, where we don't actually require those opportunity roles. We have multi-touch, first touch, and last touch attribution. We also support weighted multi-touch attribution. So that's where we could actually define the fact that a trade show touch is worth more to us. They actually visit the booth, and if they click a link in an email or if they convert through an email. We look at both the contacts and the matched leads, which is absolutely huge. And we'll see the reasons why when we actually take a look soon at some of the differences. And we've got the most robust configuration options, so we can tailor the attribution reporting to our needs. So we have control over all of the variables that we need to have control over. And it's fully integrated into Salesforce. So we talked already about one of the knocks against Marketo is that it's an external reporting source. But LeanData, all of the data is right in Salesforce, so all of your reporting can be done right from Salesforce or through a BI tool. And so it's much more trusted at the end of the day, we find, because it does exist in Salesforce. Now, the cons there is that it does require configuration. Because we have so much control over how the attribution model is set up, it does take some time, and typically we need to iterate through a few models before we land on the accurate representation of truth for any given business. So now that we've looked at some of the pros and cons and the differences between the system, we're actually going to show you some typical results that we've seen when we've done these comparisons with other clients. And you'll actually get to see some of the real conclusions that we can draw on the significant differences between the attribution sources. So here's an example of what we typically see when we do a comparison. So at the bottom in the total row, you'll actually see the difference in terms of attribution value that we're tying to marketing. And you can see that LeanData is giving more attribution dollars to marketing influence because we're able to bring in those matched leads. Later in the webinar, we'll take a look at some examples of why there's those significant differences. But what's really important to understand is not only is the dollar amount higher because we get a fuller picture, but actually the percentage that is being credited to each of our channels can actually have a big difference. And this is really important because based off of our campaign performance and what channels are doing well, that's where we're going to focus our time and our money. So we can really understand that the attribution model that we pick is going to influence the decisions that we make. So if we have an attribution model that doesn't have a full picture, that provides inaccurate data, we can often make wrong assumptions and wrong decisions. So you can see with Salesforce, for example, because it's using last touch, it will typically have a bias towards the last touch. So this is usually where sales is involved or just before sales is involved. And we can see that it's probably unsurprising to see that event. So maybe they came to a trade show or to a small, intimate decision maker dinner that we have. That this is really getting a lot of our attribution dollars. So we can see here that we're saying about 50% of our pipeline in this case is coming from events. Whereas if we look at Marketo, which has got multi-touch, and LeanData with multi-touch, we can actually see that the influence is less skewed towards just giving 100% of credit to those events, but probably these are coming in through our online advertising and digital channels. We can see that because the percentage difference between the last touch and the multi-touch between Salesforce and LeanData is quite different. So here we could start to make some assumptions that we'll actually be able to investigate in some further reporting that we'll look in this webinar. But we could say that we're actually driving a lot of those leads from our digital channels, like online advertising, from the website and social media, and that they're actually converting through other channels like our events and webinars, which is why when we use a last touch attribution model, so much of our dollars is tied with those converters, as opposed to the programs and the channels that are actually acquiring those leads, getting them in the door, and nurturing them before we actually close them out. So we can see that it's really important to pick the right attribution model because you're going to be making decisions on where to spend your time and your money, so you've got to get that right. At the end of the day, we typically see that this is very usual to see with Salesforce really underreporting the influence of marketing within an organization. Marketo is able to do a bit better because we're able to look at all contacts within the account as opposed to just contacts with opportunity roles. But because LeanData, we actually have all of the configuration settings needed to make an accurate attribution model. The real difference maker is the fact that we can actually look at matched leads. So there's leads that are within our marketing and our sales database that aren't tied explicitly to the to the account. Oftentimes that's just because sales reps and marketers may not even be aware of the fact that these influencers and researchers haven't been tied to the account. So taking into account these matched leads is super important. So once we actually show the results to our clients, we get some of their feedback. We look at the sphere of influence and the differences between each of the sources. Every single time we've actually found that the winner is LeanData as the best marketing attribution data source. At the end of the day, we need to get that full visibility into our entire influence within an account, and that means that having our matched leads is extremely important. The other thing that's really important is we need to actually have the option to configure weighting within our attribution model, so making sure that not every single touch is worth the same amount, and also making sure that we can exclude faulty campaigns, bad channels, and that we can also define the time constraints within which we actually give attribution. So with Marketo, oftentimes we'll see that a campaign, maybe an email blast that went out to the entire database, years prior, is perpetually always the best campaign simply because you have no time constraints. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. So really, whenever we've done these comparisons for clients, LeanData has always been crowned the winner. So now I'm going to show you some examples of why we really get into the differences. We've talked about the pros and the cons, but I think it's really important to illustrate what this means in an example account, just to show why you're going to end up with those significant differences in attribution between LeanData, Marketo, or within Salesforce. So here is a sample account, and this is how we would typically do attribution with Salesforce, or how, I should say, how Salesforce does attribution. You'll see here that we have an account with 4 contacts tied to that account. We also have 2 leads. May be hard to see in this slide, but those are actually dotted lines because they don't have a physical connection. So if we don't have an external tool, Salesforce doesn't know that those leads are actually tied to the account. And the attribution is always done in Salesforce with specific opportunity roles defined. So you can see here that contact C is tied to opportunity XYZ that was generated in January 2017, and that we're giving influence to both of those campaigns. So most clients will always use last touch, which is 100% of credit to the last touch, which would mean that we would only have campaign B highlighted. For those of you that have Salesforce and that have campaign influence configured and active, you would actually give some attribution dollars to campaign A as well. What's interesting to see here is, again, it's not perfect because campaign A was close to 5 years before the opportunity was actually generated. So can we really say that that played a defining role in getting that opportunity? Hard to say. What we do see is that we're not getting any visibility into any of our other contacts or to any of the leads that are not tied explicitly to the account. So we're really underreporting the true influence. And the super important thing is that we actually have an opportunity rule defined here on the opportunity, which is why we have any attribution credit. But if there isn't that opportunity rule set up, and again, this is a manual thing, you're not going to get any attribution credit. So if a salesperson didn't go through the proper process, or if they forgot to add the opportunity rule, then we would actually say, even though we had all of this campaign influence across our different marketing channels and campaigns, we would say that this was exclusively sales-driven. And so whenever we have a manual process like that, we're always going to end up with huge gaps in information. And we see a lot of our clients when we first start working with them, oftentimes they'll have as much as 50% or more of their opportunities without opportunity roles defined. And that's where they lose visibility into any of these campaign touches. If Marketo were able to take a step in the right direction, and that's where we can actually start to give credit to all campaign touches for contacts that are on the account. So you can see here that we're including attribution for all of the campaigns for contact A, contact B, and contact D, even though they don't actually have an opportunity role defined. But we have some issues with the fact that, again, campaign attribution is given perpetually no matter how long ago the touch was. So in this case, we have campaign A with a touch in May 2013 on contact A, and we have another touch in April 2012 again for contact C. Those were many years prior. It would be difficult for us to kind of come to an executive and say that we're saying that definitively, like, this actually had a role in generating this opportunity and closing this business. Given that these were so long ago, typically we would want to exclude these from campaign influence, and we would want to look at the relevant touches recently. So with Marketo, you don't have any control over this. If they had a prior campaign touch, even though it was many years prior, we're always going to give that attribution. And again, here we lose visibility into lead A and lead B. Typically, what we often see too is that it's many more leads unassociated with the account, and it's maybe one or two contacts. So we're, again, losing that full visibility and control. Whereas with LeanData, we actually get to take some of the things that Marketo got right and then take that to the next level. So this is where, again, we can take all of our attribution for campaigns on the account, regardless of that opportunity role. So this way we're not dependent on that manual process. We actually are able then to tie in our match the leads. So we get visibility into our entire database of people, so all of our leads within our marketing and sales database. And again, because we have control over all of the different variables in the attribution model, we can actually define the time period that's relevant for our campaign attribution. So in this case, we may say, I only want to look at marketing touches that were 12 months or less prior to the opportunity being created. So in this case, because the opportunity was created in January of 2017, we're including all of our touches through the year of 2016. So you can see here that for lead A, we've got June 2016, lead B, we've got July 2016, and so on. But that we're actually not giving any attribution dollars to our much earlier campaigns that are not highlighted. So for lead A, it's the one in July 2011. For contact A, it's May 2013. And for contact C, it's campaign A in April 2012. Those took place many years ago, and we can't really say accurately that those had any influence. Again, this is something that you can define. So if you wanted to say all time, you would have that flexibility. Or if you wanted to refine it to only 3 months or 6 months, depending on your business and your selling cycle, then you can absolutely define that. So really, it's the power of being able to hone in on all of the relevant campaign touches. And again, what's really important is that we get visibility into those leads, even if they're not associated with the account. So here's just a graphic, again, summarizing the differences. So if we have our campaign attribution at the center, which is at the bottom right-hand side of this slide, we can see that Salesforce has visibility into the contacts with an opportunity role defined. Marketo has visibility into the entire account, so all of our contacts, regardless of role, and that LeanData is the only one that is actually able to bring in our lead attribution. So bring in all of those leads in our database that aren't explicitly tied to an account. So now that we've taken a look at the comparison between all of our attribution sources, we've decided, and we know that LeanData is really the best model. Once we actually have that model set up, we can actually start to pull some reports that's going to give us some actionable insights. And so here is an example of some of the reports that we really recommend and that we've set up with our clients and that you can do if you have LeanData. The first of which is we really like to start at the highest level possible. And here we have the total influence on pipeline and revenue. And so these pie charts just show us the total pipeline and the total revenue for our organization. and we're dividing that into dollars or opportunities with marketing influence, which is in the blue, or without marketing influence. And so you can imagine that depending on the attribution model, you could do this with Salesforce or with Marketo data. It's going to really skew the results in that pie chart. In most cases, what you will see is that if you use Salesforce, it is really underrepresenting your true influence within the organization. And that's why it's important, again, to have a good attribution model and good attribution source like LeanData. And so this is not uncommon for us to see. We see this actually with a lot of our clients, is that up to 2/3 oftentimes has marketing influence on their pipeline. We like to really define it. Here we're talking about marketing influence, not marketing source. We really want to show that that marketing does have a wide influence on pipeline. And here we're always looking at marketing touches prior to the opportunity being created. When we look at revenue, we again see here the total influence of marketing. Here we're giving up to close to 3/4 of our one revenue has some type of marketing influence before the opportunity closes as a win. And again, this is pretty common that we see. What you want to see if you're doing a good job with your marketing is you want to see that the actual pie for revenue is actually more marketing influence than in your pipeline, because that lets you know that opportunities where we actually have a marketing touch means that it's more likely to be closed as a one opportunity as opposed to lost. If you saw that it was actually less marketing influence, that's where we'd want to take a look at how we can improve our marketing, and that's where some of the reports that we look at next are going to be really important. So once we've got that high-level look, which, by the way, executives love, we can actually take a look, because LeanData has access to first touch, multi-touch, and last touch. We can start to look at the channel performance by the attribution touch time. So whether it's first touch, a multi-touch, or a last touch model. And what this is going to really let you know is what channels really excel in what areas, whether it's lead acquisition, which would be that first touch, whether it be in nurturing, so that multi-touch, or whether it be in converting, so really closing and helping sales create those opportunities, which would be last touch. So by looking at the channel performance across these three attribution methods, we can actually start to see that, for example, here, events, it has a much higher percentage of last touch attribution than first touch, which really lets us know that it does a great job of converting leads into opportunities, whereas online advertising and the website actually have greater attribution percentages when we talk about first touch. So that really lets us know that these are the channels where we're really acquiring leads. And we can even see in examples like with email, where it's not doing any type of lead acquisition and it's not really contributing a lot to last touch, but we actually have some multi-touch, is we can understand that these are the channels that are really nurturing and helping move people along. So one of the things, if we saw this type of performance in your organization, that we might say is that we really want to use our digital channels, so like online advertising, website, even here with social media, to acquire those leads. We can then use our channels like email to drive them then to the next step, which might be to an event or a webinar to help convert them into an opportunity. Next, this is something that we were really, really impressed with and that you have access to with LeanData Attribution, is you actually have a metric on each of your marketing touches that lets you know whether it was pre-sales or post-sales. So oftentimes, with any attribution model outside of LeanData, we really have a hard time saying definitively whether our marketing touch was prior to a sales rep reaching out into that account, maybe sending an email or doing a phone call or connecting with someone. And so actually being able to say touch by touch whether marketing had their influence prior to sales' involvement or after sales' involvement is hugely important and really insightful. So one of the things here that we can see is we just do an analysis to say, okay, 4 different channels, which again, just supporting some of the earlier findings that we had in our other report, which ones are really helping acquire leads and that are influencing people prior to sales' involvement, and which ones are more in a support role so that they play a bit bigger influence once sales is already involved. So again, here you can see some similar results where website and online advertising is really generating a lot of influence prior to sales involvement, whereas other channels like events and with webinars are a little bit less. Another important thing is just holistically for our marketing, we can actually say at the end of the day, listen, we're actually influencing these leads and these contacts within our target accounts typically before sales is ever involved. So 77.2% of our marketing influence is actually prior to you actually reaching out to these target accounts and these people. So it's not just that you're already calling them, that they're actually responding. Really the holy grail is once we actually start to look at ROI analysis, and this is where we can really start to make some decisions in terms of where we're going to allocate our time and our money. And so here, by actually having accurate data for our pipeline and our revenue, we can actually start to make these ROI analysis that we have confidence in. So then by tying in our cost data, we can actually start to see where we're doing really well, where we can maintain, and where we need to probably reallocate some money. So in this case, we can see that we've got above average ROI for online advertising, website, and email. So that's where we would look to invest more. So here we can probably say that, again, our lead acquisition channels are still doing really well from a return on investment standpoint. Whereas events and webinars, we're still break even. We've got a positive return on investment. But let's really look to maintain the status quo and really look to up the ante with our online digital channels. And our social media advertising probably is underperforming here, so this is where we might want to scale back some of that spend with social media. So once we've looked at channels, we're going to want to make decisions based off of campaigns. And this is where we can, again, do the same type of analysis with our different campaigns in a channel to understand, if we were looking at trade shows, which trade shows are performing the best. But the other thing that we have access to beyond just the ROI is that LeanData actually provides a lift metric, which is extremely interesting and insightful. So the lift metric is similar to plus minus in sports. It will tell you the difference between close win rates between opportunities when a given campaign is present versus opportunities that do not have a given campaign. So if we have a negative lift, then this is saying that we certainly have no demonstrable positive influence from that campaign on our close rates, and potentially it's showing that really it's maybe even not necessarily having a negative effect, but no influence whatsoever. Whereas when we have a positive lift, we can say, hey, when we have this campaign interact with our leads or our contacts for a target account, we're much more likely to win that opportunity. So let's look to make sure that sales reps are promoting these campaigns when they're in the sales cycle, and let's look to really invest more time and more money advertising and promoting these campaigns. So once we actually have those actionable insights, we have accurate ROI that we have confidence in, we're able to look at the lift in terms of the likelihood to close opportunities as wins with specific campaigns, we can actually make data-driven marketing investments. So we can start to increase and double down where we're going to focus on campaigns and channels that have a positive ROI and that demonstrate positive lift. We can maintain the status quo on campaigns and channels with near break-even ROI and, again, not demonstrating any type of positive lift. Or we can look to consider reallocation for these ones. Again, if they're not really contributing much to the company pipeline and revenue, probably that's better spent elsewhere. And we can look to decrease our spend and or cut spend for all of our campaigns and channels that have negative ROI and negative lift. And we'll look to reinvest the spend into either our well-performing campaigns, so those where we want to double down, or into new initiatives. So just kind of summing everything up that we've looked at today, what's really just important for me to convey to everyone is that I know that if you're on this webinar that you care about attribution. Prior to becoming a Marketo consultant, I was actually client-side in charge of marketing reporting. So this is near and dear to my heart. And really, when we've actually done the comparisons and we've looked at the models, we can really start to see that organizations, decision makers, and marketers really need access to that accurate attribution data. So that way you can have the entire picture of your marketing influence. And what's really important is that you need to be able to configure it appropriately to your organizational needs. Not every company is the same, and you need to be able to define those parameters like the time. You need to bring in those matched leads, and you need to be able to even give weighting to different channels or different campaign types. Because at the end of the day, we're going to use that data to make decisions. So if we don't have an attribution model that makes sense for the company, we're going to make the wrong decisions, and we're going to be spending our time and our money in the wrong places. So it's really important to have that attribution model that is accurate and that makes sense for the organization so that we can make those data-driven decisions so we can drive pipeline and revenue, and that's going to support our organizational goals. So really appreciate everyone joining us for the webinar today. What I would like to say is that if anyone would like help, we've actually partnered with LeanData after doing a number of these comparisons from an unbiased perspective with our clients. And we actually do have an attribution starter package now where we'll actually help you capture the full picture when it comes to your marketing attribution and make informed decisions off of accurate, complete data. And so just to give you a brief idea of what you'll get with the attribution starter package, in the first week, what we'll be doing is an audit. And here we're just going to make sure that you actually have the appropriate technical setup in place for reliable attribution data. We'll make some minor fixes that can improve your attribution results. Then the next week, we're actually going to configure your LeanData attribution model, and we'll iterate through multiple models to make sure that we end up on one that is giving you accurate attribution data, and that's the best company fit. The following week, we'll actually do the comparison between Salesforce, Marketo, and LeanData attribution models, and then put together a technical report on the findings. And then finally, in the fourth week, we'll deliver those results for the attribution reports and a comparison between the systems. And we'll make recommendations based on what we found to improve your attribution reporting and also provide some high-level findings. So at the end of 30 days, we'll actually have all of these to provide to you with the attribution starter package. You'll get a comparison report that shows the differences between Salesforce, Marketo, and LeanData. You'll have the attribution framework, which will allow you for future attribution reporting on how to make informed marketing investments. We'll do the reporting audit where we do a deep dive into that systems reporting setup and identification of areas to improve your marketing data foundation. We'll provide you with training so that way you'll have guidance and training so that your internal team can run attribution reports on their own. And if you'd like, we can set up a BI data dictionary. So if this is something of interest for you and you'd like some help going through this process, doing the comparison, making sure that you have accurate attribution reporting with LeanData, and you'd like to partner up with someone who's done it before, you can contact us at attribution@revenuepulse.com. So thank you very much for being with us today for this webinar. I hope you learned a lot. It's really important to underscore the fact that we came into this process as an unbiased third party. We had no relationship with LeanData before actually being asked by our clients to do the comparison. And it's only as a result of doing this multiple times that we really have confidence in the product that they offer and the fact that it is going to give you the best attribution data so that way you can make accurate decisions for your organization. So thank you.
Thank you, David. To the audience, if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat window and we'll take them in the order that they were received. David, while the questions are being populated, let me get us started by asking. One of the problems you mentioned was that Salesforce doesn't give credit to leads, and it requires leads to be converted into contacts and be added to the opportunity. How often do you see this as a challenge to understanding true attribution?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that question because honestly, everyone struggles with it. So if you're not doing attribution with an external tool like LeanData, you simply aren't going to have those matched leads. And then the big thing too is also like we'd looked at is having those opportunity rules defined is actually a big struggle. So some organizations do a really good job and sales and marketing work hand in hand to make sure that we're doing our best to have those opportunity rules defined. But a lot of the time we don't know the influencers or the researchers behind the scenes that are coming into our marketing funnels. Maybe they're just downloading a few high-level assets, maybe like a deep dive report or something like that. but they never get over to a sales rep, and so we never attach those into the account, and certainly we don't define those as having a role on the opportunities. So I would say that all clients struggle with it to some extent, and having done this a few times, I would say that, it's not uncommon to see Salesforce attribution underreport by 30% or even as much as 50% of marketing's true influence.
I see. Here's an interesting question that came in. Can the LeanData attribution get more granular? That is, can it show us the exact campaign that was touched and what the engagement was from a lead, and even at the account and company level?
Yeah, so absolutely we can. I think we took a quick look at that when we were comparing, campaign A's through campaign B. In any of the reporting that we looked at, we can absolutely drill down into any of our campaign level data. I mean, the beauty of it really is, for any data geeks out there, is that the attribution is all done off of this marketing touch object, which is just one level away from all of our different objects in Salesforce. So we have easy access into all of our account information, all of our information on the lead or the contact, all the information on the campaign, on the opportunity. So you really can slice and dice the data and get as deep as you like.
Got it. So one of the challenges, and speaking as a demand gen professional, attribution can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. There are all these first touch models, last touch, U-shaped, linear, time decay, and so on. Each business is different in how it measures ROI. But from your experience, what are the best practices that you recommend to your clients? For example, how far before an opportunity creation should campaign touches be measured?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. From what we can see, the best organizations that do a good job of evolving to more complex models is that it's an evolution. So you don't try to boil the ocean overnight. You really want to take a crawl, walk, run approach. So that's where we recommend that things like waiting for campaign attribution, so the fact that a trade show is worth more than an email, we think that these are important things that you have access to and that you configure the model over time. But in your first models, or when you're first getting up and started, is that we recommend that you actually try to keep that to a minimum. So really look to do best practice. So use equal weighting when you do your first model. And then once you actually start to have some results and you start to understand what campaigns and what channels do better, that's where you can start to apply some weights to get a better version of a model. And then you can actually apply things like you mentioned, like U-shaped and linear and time decay. When we recommend, we just recommend doing equal split for multi-touch, all for pipeline prior to opportunity creation and for revenue prior to opportunity close. And in terms of the timing, this is usually really dependent on your sales cycle, but I think a good starting off point for most people is looking at a year prior to the opportunity being created in terms of giving any marketing influence.
I see. I mean, and a little more about that question. If a campaign is a branding type of campaign as opposed to a lead generation campaign, do you adjust the timelines to reflect the kind of campaign that's being run?
Mm-hmm. I think this is something, again, kind of sticking with the crawl, walk, run approach, that we recommend that people start to adopt later on. If we're just talking about starting from day one, we recommend that everything have the same lens and that we actually look at, again, probably a good starting off point for most organizations is 12 minutes prior to the opportunity being created. And then if we're actually able to validate some of those thoughts, like the fact that these are lead gen or awareness programs, that's where we can start to change some of our timing and maybe giving an 18-month window for those branding campaigns as opposed to those that are really trying to drive opportunities.
I see. Makes sense. A lot of your clients, I'm sure, they are doing attribution in Marketo or Salesforce, either first touch or last touch. How would you recommend transitioning to Multidose reporting when they have been reporting off last touch internally for such a long time?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is a huge question that we get oftentimes because we've been doing reporting a certain way for a long time. We've been telling our executives that this is how many dollars marketing is contributing to pipeline, and this is how many dollars we're contributing to revenue. And then we start to actually get a better version of our attribution, but then suddenly when we were before saying that we were driving or influencing 50% of our pipeline, now with LeanData, we're able to say that we're actually driving 70%. If we just do that overnight, oftentimes the baby's kind of thrown out with the bathwater. So there, what we recommend typically doing is doing both. So maintaining our historical reporting so that way we can understand some of the near-term results, so that way we can say, okay, next month I know that typically with our old attribution model we would generate about $50,000 in marketing influence pipeline. So you can start to see that trending over time. You then layer on top all of the multi-touch reporting, which is actually the better version that we want to move towards, and that we do those both for a little while until we get a good understanding and a good baseline for that LeanData. And I think another hugely important part is to actually have an education piece, especially if we're communicating this up the chain up to our executives. They need to understand why our old attribution models were really underreporting the influence and what those differences are. So doing a condensed version of this webinar, giving them the cliff notes, would be really important. And then the other thing is that it's actually been really helpful for our clients to actually have us come in and do the education piece for their executives, so that way they can just get a third-party opinion and an explanation on why the way that they've been looking at things is maybe not the true representation of the truth, and why we're evolving towards a multi-touch model.
Absolutely. And especially as everyone is moving towards ABM or ABS, I think this visibility across accounts or companies would even be more important from now on.
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I want to thank you again, David, and I also want to thank our audience today for your questions. We will send out a recording of the presentation as soon as possible. If you have any other questions on attribution, please email us at marketing@leandatainc.com or your customer success manager. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.